A woman covered in grease and engine oil, sitting alone in a hospital waiting room at midnight. That's not who a man like Jae-Hyun was supposed to notice. He had never once, in 15 years of running the most feared crime organization on the West Coast, stopped for anyone who wasn't either a threat or an asset. But when he passed that curtain and saw her, jaw set tight, eyes glistening, thanking the nurse who was cleaning the gash on her arm like the woman was doing her a favor, something inside him cracked open like a fault line. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her story. He knew absolutely nothing about the woman with the bruised face and the grease-stained knuckles sitting in that hospital bed. But he knew one thing with a certainty that shook him to his bones. He was not walking away. Before we go any further, if you're new here, this channel exists for one reason: to breathe life into stories that deserve to be told. Hit that subscribe button and the bell so you never miss a single one. Now let's get into it. The emergency room of Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles never truly slept. It simply shifted registers, from the daytime noise of sirens and children crying, to the late-night hum of fluorescent lights and the low, urgent murmur of exhausted nurses. It was a place where the city's extremes collided without warning. The powerful and the powerless sat in the same plastic chairs, waiting for the same verdict. On this particular Wednesday night, the hallway outside Trauma 3 had become a very uncomfortable place to be. A man named Jae-Hyun stood at its center. He was not an especially large man. In another context, a boardroom, a restaurant, a church, he might have passed for simply well-dressed and quietly intense. But here, under the cold hospital light, the men around him knew better. He was 39 years old, Korean-born, Los Angeles raised, and he commanded the kind of stillness that made rooms feel smaller. His dark suit was immaculate, his jaw was granite. His eyes were the kind of black that didn't reflect light, they absorbed it. 4 of his men stood in a loose formation around him, their own expensive suits, doing nothing to hide the fact that they were terrified. The reason for their terror was currently being stitched up 2 rooms down. One of Jae-Hyun's youngest recruits, barely 20, still with the kind of recklessness that hadn't yet been burned out of him, had done something profoundly stupid. He had wandered into a block that wasn't theirs, picked a fight that wasn't his to pick, and ended up with a broken collarbone and a split lip for the trouble. Jae-Hyun was not angry about the injury. He was angry about the judgment, about the exposure. About the fact that a boy under his protection had acted like there were no consequences in this city when every single thing they did had consequences. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost gentle, the way a blade is gentle before it cuts. Which one of you was supposed to be watching him tonight? No one answered, no one met his eyes. James Madhu, Jae-Hyun's most trusted lieutenant, a broad-shouldered black American from Houston who had been at his side for 11 years, stood slightly apart from the others, his expression carefully neutral. James had learned long ago that in moments like this, the wisest thing a man could do was be present without being a target. Jae-Hyun let the silence do its work. Then he turned and began walking, not toward the exit, but further down the hallway. He needed space. He needed to think without 4 men breathing apologies at him. His shoes made a precise rhythmic sound on the linoleum. Nurses stepped aside without being asked. A patient walking with an IV pole found a reason to turn around. The body knows danger even when the mind hasn't caught up. He was 3 rooms past the trauma bay when he stopped, not because he meant to, because something caught his eye through the slightly parted curtain of a treatment room. A movement, a flash of color, a shift in the light. He looked. Inside the small curtained space, a young woman sat on the edge of an examination table. She was black, mid to late 20s, with natural hair pulled back in a puff that had clearly seen better hours. She was wearing a dark navy mechanic's coverall, unzipped to the waist and tied there, with a gray tank top beneath it. The kind of clothes you wore when your hands were your livelihood. And her hands, Jae-Hyun could see them from where he stood, were extraordinary, strong, capable. Knuckles slightly thickened, nails cut short and practical, with ghost traces of grease worked into the creases of her palms, despite what must have been a thorough washing. These were not decorative hands, these were working hands. Her left arm was extended toward the nurse, who was carefully irrigating a deep, ugly gash that ran from below her elbow nearly to her wrist. The kind of wound that came from impact. Sharp metal, fast and unforgiving. But it was her face that stopped him completely. A bruise sat high on her left cheekbone, already deepening from red to purple, stark and terrible against her smooth, dark skin. Her eyes were bright with tears she was clearly refusing to let fall. Her jaw was set in a line of determined composure that Jae-Hyun recognized immediately. He had worn that same expression for most of his adult life. Don't let them see the pain. Hold the line. Stay upright. The nurse apologized for the sting of the antiseptic. The woman, this grease-stained, bruised, bone-tired woman sitting alone in an ER at midnight, turned to the nurse and smiled. Not a polite smile, not a grimace dressed up as one. A real smile, warm and genuine and completely unself-conscious, offered freely to a stranger in the middle of her own suffering. "It's okay," she said, her voice carrying the slight husk of someone who'd been swallowing pain for a while. "You're helping me. Thank you." Jae-Hyun stood in the hallway and felt something happen inside his chest that he had no vocabulary for. It wasn't attraction, exactly, though she was beautiful in the unself-conscious way of someone who had never been told to perform their beauty. It wasn't pity. There was nothing pitiful about her. It was something older and more fundamental than either of those things. Something that lived below strategy and calculation, in the part of a person that exists before they learn to be careful. He saw her, and something in him, some long-dormant, locked-away part of him, saw itself reflected. Strength wearing the face of gentleness. Courage that didn't need an audience. The bruise on her cheek filled him with a rage that was completely different from anything he'd felt that evening. The anger at his men had been professional, cold, calculated. This was pure. He turned his head slightly. James had materialized at his shoulder. He always did somehow when it mattered. "Find out who she is," Jae-Hyun said quietly. His voice had changed. James noticed it immediately, and "bring her to me." James blinked. In 11 years, he had never heard his boss use that tone. "Bring her, sir. She's a patient. She's—" "James. Just the name." That was enough. James nodded once and moved toward the curtain. "If this story already has you leaning forward, good. That's exactly where you should be. Subscribe if you haven't, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Stories like this one only keep coming because of you. Now let's keep going." Her name was Nadia Johnson. She was 27 years old, born in Inglewood, raised partly there and partly in Compton, and she was the best import car mechanic within a 5-mile radius of downtown Los Angeles. A fact she knew with the quiet confidence of someone who had earned it the hard way. She had grown up in her uncle's garage. While other kids were doing homework at kitchen tables, Nadia was doing it balanced on the bumper of a '98 Civic, listening to her Uncle Ray diagnose engine trouble by sound alone. By the time she was 16, she could do a full brake job faster than most adults. By 22, she had her own lift, her own clients, and a reputation that traveled by word of mouth through every Korean, Japanese, and European car community in the city. She had opened Nadia's Auto, a small, immaculate shop in Koreatown. 3 years ago, it was hers. Every socket wrench, every diagnostic computer, every drop of oil on the floor was hers. She had built it from nothing, and she ran it with a precision and care that her clients recognized immediately. Tonight, she was here because a suspension job had gone wrong. Not her fault. She would establish that clearly later, once the adrenaline wore off. The car she'd been working on, a heavily modified Hyundai that belonged to a client, who had apparently been less than truthful about what modifications had already been done, had shifted unexpectedly on the lift. The falling component had caught her arm. The impact had spun her into the corner of the workbench, hence the gash, hence the bruise. She had driven herself to the ER, which in retrospect had been optimistic given that her left arm had been bleeding through a shop rag the entire way. But Nadia Johnson did not call for help as a first instinct. She solved problems. She found the tools available to her. She handled things. She was in the middle of handling this, holding herself very still while the nurse worked, focusing on a water stain on the ceiling tile and mentally cataloging everything she needed to do before she could open the shop tomorrow. When a man in a suit appeared at the edge of her curtain, he was not hospital staff. Nadia knew this the way she knew the difference between an engine that needed tuning and one that needed replacing, by instinct refined through experience. His posture was wrong for a doctor, too still, too deliberate. And his eyes, when they met hers, held a quality she recognized from her years in Koreatown, the particular alertness of a man who was always on some level, calculating exits. Ms. Johnson, the man said, polite, careful, with a slight accent she couldn't immediately place. My name is James. I work for someone who would like to know you're all right. Would you be willing to come with me for just a moment? The nurse stiffened. Nadia felt the woman's hand go still on her arm. Come with you, Nadia repeated flatly. Right now. In a hospital. Where I'm being treated. It will take 5 minutes, James said. You have my word you'll be returned here safely. Your word. Nadia looked at him steadily. I don't know you. No, James agreed. But my employer saw you through the curtain and wanted to make sure you were okay. That's all this is. Something in his directness, the absence of the usual slick reassurance she might have expected, made her pause. He wasn't performing. He was just telling her. She looked at the nurse. Can you give me 2 minutes? The nurse looked deeply uncertain. Nadia appreciated that. She also appreciated that she could handle herself, and had, on multiple occasions, proven this. She slid off the table, holding her bandaged arm carefully, and followed James down the hallway to a small private family waiting room. The man standing inside it had his back to the door when she entered. When he turned, Nadia's first thought was, he looks like someone who has never once in his life been surprised by anything. Her second thought, arriving immediately after, was, he's looking at my face like he's angry about something, not at her. She knew the difference. He was angry on her behalf, and that distinction, the specificity of it, was disorienting. Who did this to you? He asked. His voice was low and careful, like he was containing something much larger than the question. Nadia blinked. Excuse me? Your face. His eyes moved to her cheekbone. Who hit you? Nobody hit me, she kept her voice even. I work on cars. Something fell. I got in the way. The change that moved across his face was subtle but unmistakable. His shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch. The line around his jaw softened. The air in the room shifted. Work accident, he said. A work accident, she confirmed. She tilted her head slightly. Who are you? He looked at her for a moment. Someone who wanted to make sure. Make sure of what? That you were safe, said it simply. No performance, no angle she could identify. Nadia Johnson had grown up in neighborhoods where she had learned early to read people, to hear what wasn't being said, to feel the shape of intentions that hadn't yet taken form. She was rarely wrong. This man was not a threat to her. She didn't fully understand what he was yet, but he was not that. I'm fine, she said. Stitches and a bruise. I've had worse from a timing belt. Something moved through his eyes. Not quite a smile. Something quieter. Good, he said. She left 5 minutes later, returned to her curtain, and let the nurse finish her work. But she found herself, as the doctor explained the aftercare instructions, thinking about the precise way the man had said, I wanted to make sure. Not I was curious. Not my man saw you and I figured I'd check. I wanted to make sure. Like it had already mattered. Like the outcome had already been important to him before he knew a single thing about her. 2 days after the hospital, a package arrived at Nadia's auto. It was not flowers. It was not food. It was a tool, specifically a professional-grade torque wrench, the exact model she had mentioned to a supplier the week before and then decided was outside her current budget. The brand was German. The quality was exceptional. There was no card, but there was a handwritten note on heavy paper. For when you're back at work. Nadia stared at it for a long time. Then she sent a text to the number written on the bottom of the note. You researched what I needed. The reply came in under a minute. James is thorough. She almost smiled. Tell James thank you. Tell him yourself. He'll be there in an hour with lunch. James arrived with enough food for the entire shop, which that day consisted of Nadia and her one part-time assistant, a 19-year-old named Darius, who could already diagnose a misfire by sound. But it was not James that Nadia was thinking about as she washed the grease from her hands. Jae-Hyun came himself the following day. He arrived in a dark car, alone, and stood in the doorway of her shop looking exactly as out of place as a man in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit could look in a garage that smelled of motor oil and brake fluid. He watched her work for 30 seconds before she acknowledged him. "You're going to get that suit dirty, just standing there," she said, not looking up from the fuel injector she was cleaning. "I've survived worse." She did look up then. He was watching her with the same focused attention he'd had in the hospital, like she was something worth studying. "Why are you here?" she asked directly. She didn't do circling. "I wanted to see how your arm was healing. It's healing fine." She set down the injector and straightened, wiping her hands on a clean shop rag. "That's a long drive from wherever you came from to check on a stranger's arm." "Los Angeles traffic is unpredictable," he agreed. "I accounted for it." She almost laughed. She didn't, but it was close. He began visiting. Not every day. He wasn't that obvious, and she wouldn't have tolerated it if he were. But regularly enough that Darius stopped, looking startled when the dark car appeared, and started having the coffee ready. He never pretended to understand what she did. Instead, he asked questions, real ones, the kind that signaled he was actually listening to the answers. He asked about the difference between OEM and aftermarket parts, about why she had chosen Korean and Japanese imports specifically, about what it felt like to diagnose a problem by sound alone. "It's like a conversation," she told him one afternoon, her hands deep in the engine bay of a Genesis G70. "Every car has a voice. You just have to learn to listen to it." Jae-Hyun was quiet for a moment. "I understand that," he said, and the way he said it told her he wasn't talking about cars. One afternoon, she found him watching her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Open, almost uncertain. "Describe to me what you're doing," he said. She looked at him sideways. "Replacing a tensioner belt." "No." He stepped closer. "Describe it, like I've never seen an engine. What are you actually solving?" So she did. She talked him through it. The way the belt transfers power, the way tension affects timing, the relationship between the components. As she talked, his eyes moved between her face and her hands with the same careful attention he gave everything. "Show me," he said quietly. Hesitantly, she guided his hands to the component. His fingers, strong, precise, more accustomed to documents, and, she suspected, other things she hadn't asked about, followed her instruction with a focused seriousness that was unexpectedly moving. He did not pretend to be good at it. He just tried. When they finished, his cufflinks were smudged with grease. He looked at them for a moment. Then he left them exactly as they were. This story isn't just about two people finding each other. It's about what it costs to let someone in when you've spent your whole life keeping the door locked. If that hits different for you, you already know what to do. Subscribe, share, and keep showing up. We build this together. Now, let's keep going. The evenings were when the walls came down. After shop hours, when Darius had gone home and the garage was locked, they would sometimes sit in the small office at the back. Nadia with a glass of sweet tea, Jae-Hyun with whatever she had, because he had stopped pretending he had preferences that mattered more than being wherever she was. He told her things in fragments. About his father who had come to Los Angeles from Busan, with $40 and a stubbornness that bordered on pathological. About the business that had started legitimate and drifted, the way things drift in a city that rewards ruthlessness. About the weight of being the one everyone looked to, and the loneliness of a room that goes quiet when you enter it. She told him about her mother, who worked double shifts at Cedars-Sinai, the same hospital where they had met, and still somehow had time to make Sunday dinner. About Uncle Ray and the garage and the years she had spent becoming someone no one could dismiss. About the ex-boyfriend who had told her that a woman who smelled like motor oil wasn't someone you brought home. He was an idiot, Jae-Hyun said. Yeah, Nadia agreed. He really was. One evening, rain came down hard against the office window. Los Angeles rain, which arrived rarely and meant everything when it did. They were sitting close, the way you do when conversation has been going for 3 hours, and neither person has noticed. He reached out. His fingers, careful and deliberate, touched the fading bruise on her cheekbone, lighter now, yellowing at the edges, almost gone. This is almost healed, he said. His voice was different, lower. Full of something she had been aware of for weeks but neither of them had named. It is, she said softly. His hand moved to cradle the side of her face. His thumb traced her jaw with a reverence that made her breath catch. He was looking at her like she was something irreplaceable, something he was only now beginning to understand the full value of. He leaned in slowly, gave her every chance to pull back. She didn't pull back. Their first kiss was not dramatic. It was the opposite of dramatic. It was quiet and searching and completely inevitable, the way the last piece of a repair finally clicking into place is inevitable. It started soft and then deepened, weeks of careful distance dissolving all at once. He did not leave that night. They stayed in the small office, the rain against the glass, her head against his shoulder, talking in the particular way of people who have just decided to be honest with each other about everything. It was warm, it was specific, it was real. And it was, as these things always are, the beginning of the most dangerous chapter. Peace, Nadia was learning, had a particular texture in Jae-Hyun's world. It was never quite still. It was more like the moment before an engine catches, full of potential energy, waiting. For weeks, their world existed in two places, her shop and his penthouse in Koreatown, a high-floor apartment that looked like a man who had never allowed himself softness, had been slowly, reluctantly, allowing it in. She noticed the changes. A throw blanket on the sofa that hadn't been there before. A coffee maker replaced with one that made the kind she preferred. A small framed photo of the two of them from a Saturday in Griffith Park, sitting on the otherwise bare kitchen counter. She didn't say anything about the photo. She didn't have to. Jae-Hyun had started a new project, a legitimate import-export business, focused on Korean automotive parts, which had been Nadia's idea, born during one of their late-night conversations about the gap in the market she saw from her shop every day. He was building something clean, something that could outlast the old structures. He was building it for her, though neither of them said that out loud, but Lee Dong-suk was watching. He had been watching for almost a month. Lee Dong-suk was a name that Jae-Hyun had put behind him 5 years ago. A former lieutenant, brilliant and brutal, exiled from the organization after an incident that had crossed the line even by the standards of their world. Lee had never accepted the exile as final. He had simply waited, the way a certain kind of dangerous man always waits for the opening. He found it in Nadia. He saw Jae-Hyun's car outside the shop in Koreatown. He saw the way the boss, who had once been pure calculation, walked differently now. The particular looseness of as a man is who has a specific be and is happy about it. Lee Dong-suk had spent 5 years cataloging every weakness in the man who exiled him. He had finally found one. It was a Thursday afternoon, the sky the particular flat gray of a Los Angeles marine layer burning off late. Nadia had a full schedule, a 3 Series BMW in for a transmission service and a Kia Stinger that needed new rotors. She'd sent Darius to the parts supplier on the east side. The shop was hers alone. She was under the BMW, halfway through the transmission drain, when she heard the shop door. She assumed it was Darius, back early. She rolled out from under the car. 3 men she had never seen stood at the entrance. Their body language told her everything she needed to know before any of them spoke. "You need to come with us," the one in front said. His English was accented, his tone the flat affect of someone delivering a message, not initiating a conversation. Nadia stood up slowly. She was still holding the drain plug wrench. "I don't think I do," she said. What happened in the next 45 seconds was fast and chaotic and loud. Nadia was not a small woman, and she was not a passive one, and a mechanic's shop contains more improvised weapons than almost any other environment. She caught one man across the forearm with the wrench. She put a second one into a tool cart, but there were three of them, and they had not come unprepared. She was restrained. Her phone was taken. She was walked out of her own shop and into a black SUV, and the shop door was pulled shut behind them. What Lee Dong-suk did not know, what he had failed to account for in his surveillance, was James Madhu. James had been at Jae-Hyun's side for 11 years. His first and most enduring skill was anticipation. He had recognized, the moment Jae-Hyun's voice changed in that hospital hallway, that this woman was going to matter in a way that created exposure. He had not needed to be told to arrange coverage. He had simply done it, two men, rotating shifts, always within half a block of Nadia's auto. When Lee's men moved on the shop, James's people were already moving. Nadia was in this SUV for less than 4 minutes before it was stopped. James called Jae-Hyun from the scene. Jae-Hyun was in a meeting with 3 potential investors for the new automotive parts venture, in a glass-walled conference room on the 22nd floor of a building in Century City, when his private phone vibrated with the specific pattern he had set aside for only one purpose. He looked at the screen, he answered. He listened for 11 seconds. Every person in that conference room would later say the same thing. They had never seen a human face change the way it has changed in that moment. Not to anger, exactly. To something older and more total than anger. Something that made the room feel physically smaller. When he spoke, his voice was very quiet. Quieter than his boardroom voice. Quieter than his disciplinary voice. Quieter than anything they had heard from him. "Bring her here alive," he said. Now. He was already standing. His chair scraped back with a sound like a gunshot in the silent room. He did not explain to the investors. He did not apologize for the interruption. He walked out of the conference room, out of the building, past his waiting driver. Because waiting was not a thing he was capable of in this moment, and began moving toward the parking structure on foot, James Old already on the line telling him the location of the safe house. He ran. The Dragon of Los Angeles. The man whose stillness was legendary, whose composure was a weapon. Ran through a Century City parking structure because the only thing in the world that mattered to him was 40 minutes away and had been frightened. We're almost at the end of this chapter, but this story is far from over. If you feel like you need to know what happens next, that's the point. Subscribe and stay close. The next part is coming, and you don't want to walk into it blind. Let's keep going. The safe house was a clean, quiet apartment in Silver Lake that James kept for exactly these situations. When Jae-Hyun came through the door, Nadia was sitting on the edge of a gray sofa, a blanket around her shoulders that she clearly hadn't asked for but hadn't removed. Her coverall was torn at the shoulder. There was a new mark on her wrist from the restraint. Her expression was tight with the particular, controlled composure of someone who is furious and frightened in equal measure and refusing to let either win. When she saw him, the composure cracked. Just slightly. Just enough. He crossed the room and knelt in front of her. Actually knelt, this man who knelt before no one, and took her face in both hands the way you hold something you came terrifyingly close to losing. Nadia, his voice broke on her name. She pressed her lips together, her eyes bright. "I'm okay," she said. "I handled 2 of them before." "I know you did," he said. "James told me. Jae-Hyun, listen to me." He was shaking slightly. She could feel it in his hands. "What happened today? This is my world touching yours, my past, my failures. You didn't choose any of this, and it found you anyway. And I..." "Stop." She put her hands over his. "Stop apologizing and tell me what we're going to do about it." He looked at her. "We." She had said we. Something settled in him. Something enormous and ragged that had been coming loose since the moment James called. "I know who sent them," he said. "Lee Dong-sik. A man I exiled 5 years ago." "Then deal with him," Nadia said simply. "And then figure out how to make sure this doesn't happen again." "I will." He looked at her steadily. But Nadia, after this is done, when Lee is handled, I need you to know that I'm changing what this is. What I am, he paused. I've been building something clean, something worth having. I started it for the right reasons, but he stopped, looked at his hand still holding her face. I want to finish it for you. She studied him for a long moment, this complicated, careful, quietly terrifying man who had sent her a torque wrench before he sent flowers, who had let her put grease on his cufflinks without flinching, who had just run through a parking structure in a bespoke suit because she was scared. I'm not going anywhere, she said finally. He exhaled. The longest, most unguarded breath she had ever heard from him. Good, he said softly. Because I have no idea what I'd do if you did. That night, back at the penthouse, the city spread below them through the floor-to-ceiling glass. Los Angeles at night, the endless glittering grid of it, indifferent and enormous. Nadia stood at the window with a glass of water, her shoulder bandaged, her posture straight. Jae-Hyun was on the phone with James, finalizing what would happen next with Lee Dong-suk. His voice from across the room was the voice she had first heard, cold, precise, unhurried. She had spent the past hour turning something over in her mind. She knew what he was. She had known for a while, in the way you know things you aren't ready to say out loud. The stillness, the men, the way a room organized itself around him. She had grown up in Koreatown. She understood the structures. She also knew what he was becoming. She had watched it happen, increment by increment, in the space between an engine bay and a rain-soaked office window. When he finished the call and came to stand beside her, she didn't look away from the city. This isn't over, she said, not a question. No, he agreed. Not yet. Lee Dong-sik will not be a problem after this week. She turned to look at him then. And after that, Jae-Hyun looked out at the lights of Los Angeles, the city his father had arrived in with $40 and a stubbornness that had apparently been inherited. The city where he had built everything he had and was now, quietly but completely, rebuilding into something different. After that, he said, I want to show you something. What? He looked at her. What it looks like when I choose differently. Nadia held his gaze for a moment. Then she turned back to the window. Okay, she said quietly. Show me. Below them, the city breathed and pulsed and waited, vast and full of every possible future. Lee Dong-sek was still out there. The old structures were still standing. The road between where they were and where Jae-Hyun was trying to go was not going to be short or clean or safe. But she was still here, and so was he. And for now, in the particular grammar of their particular story, that was enough to begin. And that right there is where the next chapter starts. Jae-Hyun has made his choice. Nadia is still standing, but Lee Dong-sik hasn't been dealt with yet. And men like that don't disappear quietly. If you need to know what happens next, you already know what to do. Subscribe. Hit the bell. Drop a comment and tell me, are you Team Nadia, or do you think she should run while she still can? I read every single one. We keep this story alive together, so don't go anywhere.